Hi everyone, this is a video for Chapter 1, Segment 1 for the first week of class. So one of the most important lessons we hope to convey in this class is that the interactions between brain and behavior are reciprocal. Basically, this just means that we want to keep in mind and then explore the two-way relationship on how the structures and actions of the brain produce mind and behavior, and in turn, how our behavior modifies the structures and actions of the brain. So continuing from there, the brain produced the entire extent of human knowledge. So that means everything we understand about the universe is because of our brain. The human brain has produced every written and visual form of knowledge that we have. So going on from there, they got into a little bit of structures and content of the brain. So one of the important structures that it highlighted were synapses. This is just the location where neurons contact other cells. And then another important feature of the brain the book disclosed was an axon. This is a specialized extension of a neuron. It also noted that axons produce electrical impulses that travel hundreds of miles per hour. This allows quick communication between neurons in our brain. So then the big question, what is behavioral neuroscience? While there is no agreement that defines the boundaries of behavioral neuroscience, philosophers were the first people to study the relationship between the brain and behavior. These findings contributed to the birth of modern-day fields that we now call biology and psychology. So some important terms to keep in mind when discussing behavioral neuroscience is a neuron, which seems very logical. It is behavioral neuroscience. So a neuron is also referred to as a nerve cell, or it's the basic unit of the nervous system. We have approximately 86 billion neurons in our brain. Neuroscience is then defined as the study of the nervous system. It's also regarded as the study of the brain. Behavioral neuroscience, which is a more accurate description of the field, is sometimes called biological psychology. Biological psychology is just the field that relates behavior to bodily processes. However, the definition of behavioral neuroscience is the study of the neural basis of behavior and mental processes. Whatever we decide to call this field, it is very, very important that we keep the main goal in mind. And the main goal of this field is to understand the neuroscience underlying behavior and experience. As we look at figure 1.2 in our textbook, we see that there are many different professionals that work in the field of behavioral neuroscience. Some examples range from psychologists to engineers to neurologists, just to throw a couple out there. That means that there are many career opportunities in universities and private industries relating to this field. There are 5 main viewpoints that explore the biology of behavior. These 5 major perspectives are describing behavior, studying the evolution of behavior, observing the development of behavior and its biological characteristics over the lifespan, studying the biological mechanisms of behavior, and finally, studying applications of behavioral neuroscience. An example of this would be applications to dysfunctions of human behavior. Now, it is important to keep in mind that each perspective yields information that complements the others. This makes the combination of the 5 viewpoints very, very powerful. We can then relate each perspective to 3 kinds of behavior, which is sexual behavior, learning and memory, or language and communication. Table 1.1 on page 4 highlights all the 3 areas of behavior that the 5 viewpoints can be applied to. Sexual behavior mainly focuses on mating and reproductive capacities. Learning and memory focuses on how our memory changes with time and among species, and also how learning is reinforced through rewards and punishment. Language and communication then focuses on how speech patterns are formed, how we ask our questions, and how our speech changes, beginning when we learn to speak as opposed to if we need to modify our speech due to an accident or some kind of other tragedy. So the main criteria used to describe behavior are either detailed acts or processes or results or functions. So up here we see structural versus functional. That basically is just highlighting either detailed acts or processes or results or functions. The structural concept is related to processes. So an example would be when you're moving your arm, what contractions of what different muscles are being used. The functional, however, is related to the results or functions. So an example would be the limb in my arm was used for walking or running or texting or anything like that. However, it's very important that no matter what criteria we use, In order to make it useful for scientific study, we must provide a description that is precise and that reveals the essential features of the behavior. To do so, we must accurately define our terms and units. So, Charles Darwin's theory of evolution through natural selection is central to all modern biology. From this theory, we get two emphases from Darwin. One is the continuity of behavior in biology due to our common ancestry, and the second one is species-specific differences in behavior and biology that have evolved as adaptations to different environments. So that sounds like a lot to take in, but basically it just breaks down to that nature is conservative. So if particular features of the body or behavior evolve, they may be maintained for millions of years, and this may explain why different species appear to have very similar characteristics. An example would be that electrical messages in nerve cells are essentially the same in people and jellyfish. Although people and jellyfish don't look the same, we do have similar neural impulses. So this is what's called conservative characteristics, and a conservative characteristic is referred to in the context of evolution that refers to a trait that is passed on from a common ancestor to two or more descendant species. I made a little note to myself, just remember that conserved is a trait that is passed on, because when you conserve something, you save it. So humans and jellyfish have very similar electrical messaging because these features first arose in a shared ancestor. However, it is important to remember, just because this feature is similar, it does not mean that the species shared a common ancestral. Similar solutions may have evolved independently in different species due to adaptations to their environment. So it is very important to remember the concept of ontogeny. Ontogeny is the process by which an individual changes in the course of its lifetime, meaning how it grows up and grows old. I made another little note to myself. The gen in Jenny reminds me of generation, so I associate generation with a lifetime, which means I can remember that ontogeny is changes in the course of a lifetime. By observing the way in which a particular behavior changes during ontogeny may give us clues to its functions and mechanisms, which then goes back to the viewpoint of the mechanisms of behavior and why they're important. There's a chart on page 5 that kind of highlights that. I would just look at that at your leisure if you're having a difficult time grasping the ideas of Charles Darwin. To conclude, studying the development of reproductive capacity and of differences in behavior between the sexes, along with changes in body structures and processes, throw light on body mechanisms underlying sexual behaviors. Again, that kind of just goes back to how the 5 viewpoints can be related to 3 different areas of learning. Because when we look at how females and males develop differently, the mechanisms of how they use it, and tie it all to sexual behavior, it kind of just relates all the concepts to one another. And then that's pretty much it for the first section.